I kicked my daughter out after she attacked her little brother. My wife says I went too far. My 18-year-old daughter, Chloe, is bipolar and is very difficult to live with. She throws fits over the tiniest of things and blames her depression on everything. It has been a decade of walking on eggshells in my own home, never knowing which version of my daughter was going to walk through the door. When she was younger, we thought it was just a difficult temperament, but as she hit her teens, the swings became violent and unpredictable. Got a D on a test, blames it on depression. We would try to sit her down to help her study, offer tutors, or even just ask what went wrong. She would scream that we were pressuring her and that her brain simply wouldn't work because of her illness. Didn't do her chores, blames it on depression. The dishes would pile up, her room would become a literal biohazard, and if I so much as mentioned the smell, she would break down and say I was attacking her while she was down. Leaves the house for 4 hours without warning, blames it on depression. I can't tell you how many nights I've spent staring at the GPS on her phone, watching her drive aimlessly, only for her to come home and say she needed to feel something. Uses my car and leaves it on empty when she gives it to me, blames it on depression. I'd be late for work, rushing to the garage, only to find the range at 0 miles, because she couldn't be bothered to stop at the station 5 minutes from our house. Goes drinking, blames it on depression. She's 18, but she finds ways to get alcohol, and then we have to deal with the fallout of a bipolar episode mixed with a hangover. Chloe has been going to therapy twice a week for the past 4 years and she's still hard to live with. We have tried every therapist in a 50-mile radius. We've tried cognitive behavioral therapy, dialectical behavior therapy, and family counseling. She goes through episodes where she's really pleasant and lovely. For a week or two, she's the girl I remember, the one who liked to bake and had a sharp sense of humor. We'll watch movies together and I'll think, maybe this time the meds are working. We've taken her to a mental health facility 3 times now. Each time she comes home fine for about a month. She's polite, she follows the contract we set for her, and she takes her pills in front of us. Then before you know it she turns into Satan. It is impossible to predict. She takes medication for it but she's still all over the place. The atmosphere in our house is heavy. My 9-year-old son, let's call him Leo, has spent his entire conscious life watching his sister explode. He's a quiet kid, the polar opposite of Chloe. He hides in his room when he hears her voice rise. We have been trying our best to deal with her but she makes it extremely hard. What set me off the edge was yesterday. The day started off tense. Chloe had been in a low for 3 days, which usually means she's snappy and looking for a fight. I had left my wallet on the kitchen counter for maybe 10 minutes while I went to change my shoes. When I came back down, I didn't think anything of it. Later that afternoon, Leo came into my office. He was pale and fidgeting with his shirt. He told me that Chloe grabbed my wallet on the counter and took all the cash I had in it. I had just gone to the ATM to get $200 for our weekend groceries and gas. I went to the kitchen and checked. The wallet was there, but the cash compartment was empty. I felt a cold, hard knot form in my stomach. It wasn't even about the money, it was the blatant theft in a house where we give her everything. I confronted Chloe about it in her room. She immediately went into a defensive crouch, claiming she didn't know what I was talking about. Then she shifted to saying she needed it for something she couldn't explain. Then, the inevitable, I'm just having a really hard time right now, Dad, my head is dark. I wasn't buying it this time. I told her the excuses were over. I grounded her for 2 months and took her car keys away. Told her she'll get them back when she is done with the school year. I reminded her that she already was grounded for throwing my son's favorite toy away for no reason, a vintage plane my father had given him. She had just looked Leo in the eye and dropped it into the outdoor trash bin where it got crushed by the garbage truck. I went to grab her keys from her nightstand. She lunged for them, screaming that I was ruining her life and isolating her. I managed to get them and walked out, heading toward the kitchen to lock them in the safe. Next thing I knew she's gone. I didn't see her fly past me, but the house went quiet for a split second. I start to look for her, thinking she might have run out the front door to her boyfriend's car. Then I hear crying. Not a loud, dramatic Chloe cry, but a high-pitched, breathless sob from the hallway near the stairs. Then Chloe yelling, "That's for snitching on me." I rounded the corner and saw the most horrific thing I've seen as a father. My 18-year-old daughter, who is nearly 5 feet 8 inches, had physically cornered my 9-year-old son. She punched my 9-year-old son as hard she possibly could. It wasn't a clip to the shoulder. It was a targeted, full-force blow to his abdomen. He was in tears on the floor curling up in a ball. He couldn't even catch his breath to scream, he was just gasping. I told Chloe that's enough. The rage I felt was unlike anything I've ever experienced. It was a quiet, vibrating anger. I looked at her and saw no remorse, just a flickering, manic satisfaction that she had won against the snitch. Told her to pack her things and she's not welcome in our house again. She froze. The reality hit her like a physical weight. She cried and kept apologizing, saying she won't do it again, when I know she will. This is the cycle. Hurt someone, apologize, wait for the reset, hurt someone again. I told her she has to leave immediately. I couldn't have her under the same roof as my son for one more hour. My priorities shifted in that second from helping my sick daughter to protecting my victimized son. She grabbed her things, shoving clothes into a suitcase while sobbing about how I was abandoning her during a crisis. I didn't help her pack. I stood in the doorway and watched to make sure she didn't take anything else that wasn't hers. When she was done, I walked her to the door. I tossed her the keys to her car and said, "I'll deposit $250 in your account. That'll be enough for a hotel for a little bit. Figure out where you'll be staying." She left within 10 minutes. The tires screeched as she pulled out of the driveway. I go to check on my son and he has a massive red mark on his stomach. He was still shaking, his little hands clutching his stomach. I took him to the hospital because I was terrified of internal bleeding or a ruptured spleen. The force she used was not sisterly sibling rivalry force. It was adult violence. The hospital visit was a nightmare. The doctors had to ask how it happened. I had to tell the truth. I took him to the hospital and the doctor said he will be fine after time. By the way, that was fun having to explain to the police. They had to involve a social worker because it involved an adult sibling and a minor. I felt like the worst father on earth. I check on it the next day and it is massive. The bruise is a deep, angry purple-black, the size of a dinner plate. Every time he moves or coughs, he winces. While all this was happening, my wife was on a business trip and I explained everything to her over the phone. I sent her the pictures of the bruise. I expected her to be as horrified as I was. But she's caught in the mother's guilt trap. She thinks that we should have dealt with her in another way. She suggested we should have just locked Chloe in her room or called the mobile crisis unit again. I disagree, saying that we should have done this a long time ago. How many times can you, crisis unit, a person who refuses to change and actively harms a child? We both wanted to post this on here and ask what could have I done differently to fix this. Small update, I woke up to some pretty good advice this morning. What I think I'm going to do is to get her an apartment. I can pay for it. I'll pay for everything but the groceries and all the furniture are on her. I'm gonna keep doing this until she either agrees to mental institution, took her once without consent. Never got better there. Just pretended she did, or she goes to college. She's not that bad of a student. She's about to start her senior year. Update. So I have a good update for you guys. I seriously sat down and reflected about what I could have done better given the situation. The general consensus was it was a good thing to make her leave but not to let her completely on her own. I told my wife about this post and she read it and saw a lot of the advice given. Here is what we both agreed on. The first couple of days after everything happened were a mess in ways I didn't fully expect. It wasn't just the immediate fallout from Chloe leaving or dealing with my son's injury. It was the silence in the house, the shift in routine, and the reality of what had actually happened settling in. My son was quieter than usual, not withdrawn exactly, but more cautious. My wife was still away for most of it, so I was handling things on my own, and that gave me a lot of time to think whether I wanted it or not. I kept going back to the moment it all escalated. Not to justify anything, but to understand if there was a point where I could have handled it differently. The more I looked at it, the more I realized that kicking her out in that moment may have been necessary to protect my son, but leaving it there without any structure or follow-up plan wasn't the best move. That part hit me harder after reading through responses and actually considering what could have happened if things went a different way after she left. When my wife came back, we sat down and went through everything properly. She had already read the post and the responses, and for once we weren't arguing about whether something was an overreaction or not. The focus shifted to what happens next instead of who was right in the moment. That was probably the most productive conversation we've had about Chloe in a long time. We went over her history again, not in a blaming way, but just laying it out clearly. The therapy, the previous stays at facilities, the cycles she goes through, the way things stabilize for a short period and then fall apart again. It wasn't new information, but seeing it all lined up made it harder to ignore how consistent the pattern has been over the years. We would help Chloe out by sending her to a mental institution. We found the best one in the state that we thought would be the best fit for her. We told Chloe that she can either go willingly or we would have her sent there for being a danger to others. That conversation with Chloe was not easy. It didn't happen immediately either. We gave it a day to cool off before approaching her, and even then it was tense from the start. She was staying in a hotel at that point, and when we met her, she already seemed defensive. It wasn't explosive at first, but there was a clear resistance to anything that sounded like control or restriction. We laid out the options as calmly as possible. Not as a punishment, but as the next step given what had happened. There wasn't any attempt to sugarcoat it, but we also didn't go in with threats right away. That changed when it became clear she wasn't going to consider it on her own. She reluctantly agreed. It was about 3 hours of arguing, but she finally said she'd go. Those hours were draining in a way that's hard to explain without repeating the same patterns that have been happening for years. It went from denial to anger to attempts at negotiation, and then back around again. There were moments where it seemed like she might walk out entirely and refuse everything, and others where she was quieter and actually listening. It wasn't a straight path to an agreement, but eventually she accepted that this was happening. We took her on Monday. Right now as I'm typing this, it is Friday night. The drive there was quiet. Not tense in an obvious way, but not comfortable either. It felt like everyone was holding back, not because there wasn't anything to say, but because saying the wrong thing could set everything off again. When we got there, the process was more structured than I expected. Intake took time, and there were a lot of questions, paperwork, and evaluations before she was fully admitted. Leaving her there was harder than I thought it would be. Not because I doubted the decision, but because it's still your kid, and walking away from them in that kind of environment isn't something that feels normal no matter how necessary it is. I've changed my work schedule so I can see Chloe every chance I get. I want to make sure she understands that we're here for her despite us being 2 hours away. That part was important to both me and my wife. There's a difference between setting boundaries and completely stepping back, and we didn't want her to feel abandoned even if she wasn't at home anymore. The visits haven't been long, but they've been consistent. Some of them are better than others. There are moments where she's more open, and others where she's clearly frustrated with the situation. It's only been a few days, but I think it's helping her get away from high school and whatnot. She was born in the summer, for those wondering. I can't truly tell if she's better, to be completely honest. It's only been a few days, so it's really hard to tell. The environment itself seems more controlled, which is probably the point. There's structure, supervision, and less room for things to spiral in the way they do at home. Whether that translates into long-term change is something I'm not making assumptions about this early. Now for the bad part. She doesn't want to stay there much longer, but I told her I'm not signing release papers until the doctors okay it, and she truly believes she will be better. Wife agreed. That's been the biggest point of tension since she got admitted. The initial agreement to go didn't mean she accepted staying. After the first couple of days, she started pushing to leave. Not aggressively, but consistently. Each visit included some version of that request. I feel shitty for making her stay against her will, but I don't want her to do something she will regret. That part hasn't changed. If anything, being there in person and seeing her makes it more complicated emotionally, not less. At the same time, the reason she's there hasn't gone away. What happened with my son isn't something that can be brushed aside because a few days have passed. She's legally an adult. If she does something stupid, then that's on her. We can only do so much. That's something I've had to accept more directly now. There's a limit to what we can control, and at this point it's more about reducing risk and giving her the tools to manage herself better rather than trying to prevent every possible outcome. My son is fine, if anyone is wondering. He has a bad bruise, but he'll be okay. The bruise looked worse the next day than it did initially. That was probably the most unsettling part of it. Seeing how much damage was actually done after the fact made everything feel more serious than it already did in the moment. He's been checked by doctors and physically he's going to be fine, but we're keeping an eye on how he's doing overall. CPS came and we had to explain the whole situation to them on Tuesday, but it looks like they will be back soon for another checkup. That process was straightforward but uncomfortable. There's no way around that. They asked questions, looked at the situation, and documented everything. There wasn't any indication that we were in trouble, but it's still something you don't want to deal with if you can avoid it. Also, I'm not fully sure I want her in my home again. Chloe has gone to mental institutions before, and it didn't stick forever. I'm going to have a talk with my wife about it. I'm not entirely certain on what to do on that part. That's the part that hasn't been resolved yet. It's not something we're rushing into a decision on. There's a difference between short-term progress in a controlled environment and long-term stability at home, and we've seen before how quickly things can shift after she comes back. We've talked about different possibilities, including her living situation after she leaves the facility, what kind of structure needs to be in place, and what boundaries we're not willing to compromise on anymore. None of those conversations have led to a final answer yet, but at least they're happening in a more realistic way now. But thank you so much. You all made me realize that she may do something really bad in the heat of the moment because of getting kicked out. I didn't fully think that part through, so thank you again.
Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Daily Tales Update.